right. Hi, everybody. This is Nico. I am the author of the book No Period, Now What? And this is my monthly Instagram Live. And yeah, I'm going to give it a couple of minutes for people to join. You can get the book on my website, noperiodnowwhat.com/book. That's a great place to go. And a lot of the questions that people are asking are answered in the book. There is a ton of information in there. There's information about sort of how you get HA to start with, my recommendations for recovery in terms of how much to eat, what to do for exercise, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to go now and let's go to the questions that I have. So like last month, I have sorted my questions sort of in order, talking about sort of questions about hypothalamic amenorrhea, HA to get started, and then some about recovery, and then about trying to conceive and getting pregnant. So we will start with getting HA in the beginning. So one thing I actually just want to talk about in general is I've heard from a lot of people that their doctors say, oh, you're never going to get a natural period back. You've had anorexia, it's just never going to happen. One woman is told there's a 2% chance of you getting your period back naturally. And I just really want to emphasize how little truth there is in that statement. So based on the survey that I did for my book, where people told me about sort of all of their HA history. I went back to a lot of the women that had not gotten their periods back when I did that survey, because they were either pregnant or breastfeeding or just hadn't gotten their periods back. And out of 128 women, only 2 of them have not gotten their periods back at this point. There were more that took the survey, other reasons that they weren't included in that cohort. But so that's a 98% recovery rate. So for any doctor to say there's only a 2% chance of you getting your period back, it's just plain flat out wrong. And I think it's really important that everybody knows that. So sort of talking a little bit more about that is a question from Maggie Cucumber, who is saying she's never had a natural period, and is it still possible to get it back? That's a tough question to answer, because there can be some conditions that cause what's called primary amenorrhea, which is where you never get a period to start with. So there can be physical conditions, like if you don't have a uterus or ovaries, or there's a blockage in your uterus. There are some genetic conditions that can be associated with primary amenorrhea. So those should all be ruled out before you move forward with anything else. And then if you can have primary amenorrhea due to HA-like factors, so that is anorexia or just a continued underfueling, over-exercising. And in that case, it's absolutely possible to get your period back. There's no underlying condition, nothing underlying that's wrong. So it's just a matter of getting to the point where your hypothalamus is secreting the hormones that it needs to. So the gonadotropin-releasing hormone is sort of the driver behind all of this, and that encourages the pituitary gland to produce the follicle-stimulating hormone, which causes a follicle to grow. And then as the follicle grows, the estrogen rises. Eventually, the estrogen gets high enough that it causes a luteinizing hormone surge, or LH surge, which is what gets you to actually ovulate. And then after ovulation, the follicle kind of collapses and becomes the corpus luteum, which is what secretes progesterone to support your lining throughout what's called the luteal phase. And then if you don't get pregnant, then the corpus luteum degrades and you get your period. So if you've never had a natural period due to sort of undereating and underfueling when you were a teenager, then I think it's very possible to get it back. You might need some jump starting. So there are medications called Clomid or Femara that can help with pushing your body to ovulate once you are in a place in terms of your energy and your exercise where your body is happy. So Clomid and Femara do not work when you are sort of in the throes of HA, because your body just doesn't have enough fuel, and those medications are basically giving you a push to ovulate. So it's not enough to overcome the energy deficit from undereating and overexercise. But once you've gotten rid of that energy deficit, then the Clomid and Femara can be helpful. So that was a question from Kate, S.A., can't pronounce that. Anyway, so she asked about HA in those that have had a large weight loss in the past. So this was an interesting group of women. Often, you get to like a completely quote unquote normal weight, doctors will look at you and say, oh, you can't have HA, you don't fit the profile, which actually really frustrates me, because I think a lot of doctors don't understand that you can have HA no matter what your absolute body weight. It's much more about the underfueling and the overexercise. So in somebody that has had a large weight loss, I think there's also an underlying component of the leptin system that can be different from somebody who has not had a large weight loss in the past. And so in a woman in that situation, again, I encourage making sure that you are getting enough fuel for your body. This is another question from somebody, sort of a rough calorie target for recovery. Again, everybody is different, but the rough number that I like to give is about 2,500 calories. That is based, there's a lot of information in the book about where that number comes from. It's based on some studies that were done in people where they were given, either they lived in a room where all of the energy output is measured, or they were given water to drink that has a radio label on it, and that allowed the researchers to measure exactly how much energy was burned by the participants in the study. And so they came up with equations, and based on those equations, we calculate that 2,500 calories is the rough number that's, sort of fully fueling all of your systems. It's a lot higher than the number that many of us are told, in a lot of literature out there. It sort of says 2,000 calories is your daily needs, but that's based on self-reported studies. So where they've taken people and said, okay, how much did you actually eat in these 24 hours? And I think we all know how variable that can be, depending on, there can be misreporting or misremembering. So the studies where they're actually doing physical tests to figure out how much energy people are using, I think are much more solid and reliable than those self-reports. So I'm getting a few questions mixed up here, but so 2,500 calories is the target. And that said, I don't encourage people to actually count calories, maybe for a couple days to get a sense of how much you're eating, but it's really the long-term ideal is to get to a place where you just eat, you're hungry, you eat, you eat more if you've exercised, because often the exercise that we do it kind of suppresses hunger signals, so we don't actually often eat enough to support the exercise that we're doing if we don't consciously make an effort to do so. So getting back to Kate's question, so in somebody that has had a large weight loss, once they are adequately fueling and have cut out sort of high intensity exercise, which can cause an increase in cortisol that can help suppress the hypothalamus, I think it's very reasonable to use something like Clomid or Femara to give your hypothalamus that push towards actually getting you to ovulate. So that's definitely a case where I would recommend that as a path forward. I do work with people one-on-one, and that would be a great thing for us to work together on to really figure out, okay, is your body in a good place now for trying the Clomid or Femara? And so Frida, Bimi, and Terry had asked that same question. So in terms of when you might consider trying Clomid or Femara, I generally say, the median time to recovery is about 5 months. So that's sort of a reasonable time frame for getting your body into a good place. If you don't have your period in 5 months, 6 months, 8 months, then I think it's very reasonable to look into some of the medications that can help jumpstart your cycles. It's really, really, really important that you are actually working toward recovery, that you have cut out your high intensity exercise, that you are adequately fueling, because A, the Clomidine Femara don't work if you're not doing those things, so it's kind of pointless. And B, yeah, there's really just A. Okay, next question, just around HA, was from Missy Mermaid. She asks, is it a problem to have a short luteal phase if you're not trying to get pregnant? I would say it's not as much of a problem, but it does still indicate some deficits in your cycle, and I think it's worth working to remedy a short luteal phase. So just as a reminder, the luteal phase is the time between when you ovulate and when you get your period. It's very common for those of us with HA to have a short luteal phase after recovery. I think it's about 30% of us that do so. And basically what this means is that you're not getting sort of the quote-unquote normal level of progesterone because your corpus luteum is degrading too early. So you are getting your period maybe before you technically quote-unquote should. So we often talk about estrogen in terms of being helpful for bone density and all the other things that the estrogen does, helping with our heart, with our brains. Progesterone is part of that equation too. So I think that it is worth, in all of us, it's worth knowing when you ovulate so that you know, A, are you actually ovulating in a given menstrual cycle, and B, how long your luteal phase is. There are a couple of things that you can do to help lengthen your luteal phase. If you're trying to get pregnant, you can use progesterone, which is, you can get prescription progesterone from your doctor. We have a whole chapter on luteal phase in No Period Now What, so there's lots to read there, especially when you're trying to get pregnant. If you're not trying to get pregnant, it doesn't have quite the same level of importance, but like I said, it's still worth working on. So there are a couple things you can do that are fairly natural, what have you. One of them is taking vitamin C. There was a study that I referenced in No Period Now What that showed that vitamin C helped with luteal phase progesterone amounts and also increasing the length. And the other thing is flaxseed. So ground flaxseed, there was another study where I actually loved the study because they reported the data for the individual participants, which often doesn't happen. So there were increases in luteal phase. One woman had a shorter luteal phase taking flaxseed. This is ground flaxseed, 10 grams a day. She had a shorter luteal phase by 1 day. Everybody else had either the same or longer luteal phase, and the longest was up to 5 days longer. So I love flaxseed. It's, there's a lot of information in the medical literature about how it can be, it's possibly helpful for preventing all kinds of diseases, and there's no downsides. Like I've looked and there's absolutely nothing that I found that suggests any detriment whatsoever to taking flaxseed. So it's got great omega-3s in it. It just seems like an overall healthy thing to be consuming. So I eat it every day. I give it to my kids, and I just feel like it's a great thing for anybody to add into their daily fare. It's a component of seed cycling, if you've heard of that. When I looked into seed cycling, there was not any great support for any of the other seeds as being particularly beneficial for getting cycles back for sure, but even generally for fertility or pregnancy, whereas there is for flaxseed. And in fact, the studies that are done on flaxseed all have the animals or people take it constantly. There's none of this switching back and forth between different things. So I recommend just 10 grams of ground flaxseed, which is like a tablespoon and a half every day. If you like it, if you don't like it, don't eat it. It's whatever. But it's just a great thing to add in general. And that can definitely help with your luteal phase along with the vitamin C. Okay, so another question was from Sisti. She's asking, how quickly can your estrogen rise? So she had estrogen measured at 20 picograms per mil, which is, it's on the low side. Typically, I don't find that estrogen is particularly related to HA or recovery. It often tends to be low. It doesn't seem to go up much until we actually have a follicle growing. So, Steve was saying that she's feeling a lot of fertile signs right now, like increased egg white cervical mucus, and wondering if it's possible for that really to be a real thing, given her estrogen was so low 2 weeks. Oh. Okay, now we are on pause because we're having a test of the National Wireless Emergency Alert System, a presidential alert. Awesome. Okay. All right. I think we're back. I just got a National Emergency Alert System test. I don't know if anyone else got that. It was a little weird. So hopefully we're back online, and now I need to think about what I was talking about. So how quickly can estrogen rise? So the estrogen really starts to go up once you have a follicle growing. So there's a signal at the beginning of your cycle that causes your follicle stimulating hormone levels to increase a little bit, and that starts a follicle growing. As the follicle grows, the egg inside it gets more mature and starts secreting estrogen. So I would say it's absolutely possible to have a normal ovulation, normal follicular growth and ovulation with an estrogen of 20 picograms per mil 2 or 3 weeks ago, because that was at a time where you did not have a follicle growing, and then once it starts, then your estrogen rises and everything is all good. The rising estrogen when we have a growing follicle is what really supports our bone health, heart health, all of that, because that gets to a level that really, especially for the bones, it's that higher level during the follicular growth, and then right after ovulation that is most supportive of the, the cells that create new bone. And it's also those higher levels of estrogen that are supportive of sort of cardiac recovery. So let's see. So we talked a little bit about Clomid and Femara for jumpstarting cycles. So just to talk a little bit more about how those actually work, they cause your body to sense a slightly lower level of estrogen. They do it in two different ways, but the end result is the same. And that pushes your hypothalamus to produce a little bit more of the gonadotropin releasing hormone, which causes your pituitary to then make follicle stimulating hormone, and the whole egg growth process starts. So Maria had asked about taking soy isoflavones. Those are quite similar. Those are similar in mechanism to Clomid. They just are not as strong. So one can take soy isoflavones to sort of jumpstart cycles. They tend not to work in somebody that isn't already very close to cycling naturally, which you can tell by sort of increases in cervical mucus, especially egg white mucus. It's more, the soy isoflavones are more useful for shortening cycles once you are already cycling. But if you don't have a way of getting the Clomid or Femara, if your doctor is not willing to prescribe them to you, then you can sort of take soy isoflavones to potentially, in the same way as you would take Clomid or Femara, to potentially jumpstart things and get them going. Often our baseline hormones will get back to a very normal place, normal being sort of around 6 to 7. That's where, that's sort of very classic standard, what you see in, in a very normal person. I mean, obviously those hormones can be all over the place, but that's really generally a good sign when your FSH and LH get to that level. So once you're there, there's another signal that we don't know what it is yet that actually causes the menstrual cycle to restart. So sometimes that just doesn't happen for somebody, and so that's where Clomid and Femara can be helpful. I feel like I'm talking about those a lot, and that's not really my focus, but there have just been a lot of questions that have sort of related to that. So G. Hartstone is asking, what is a fertile BMI? What I found in my study and the survey that I did was that generally if you're at a lower BMI to begin with, getting to like a 22 to 23 is likely to be a happy place for your body. That doesn't mean that you should aim for 22 and then say, okay, I'm at 22, I'm done, because our bodies are all different. And I think that's a really key thing to understand. It's so easy to compare ourselves to other people and say, oh, person X got her period back at a BMI of Y, so, I should be able to too. Our bodies don't work like that. They don't know about your friend or your family member or anything like that. It's really about where your own body is happy. So, like I said, generally 22, 23, somewhere bigger than that is where people's bodies are happy. Some people recover periods at a lower BMI. Some people have to get to a higher BMI. It's really much more about the food freedom and eating when you're hungry, eating all the different kinds of food, as many as your body is happy with. So, lots of us restrict carbs at the moment because there's all the hand wavy fear of carbs that, I'm not really sure why. But our bodies like carbs, our hormones like carbs. So I really encourage you, if you've been restricting carbs or if you've been restricting fat, to try and add those back in as much as you can. There's no set ratio of macros that's going to give you your period back. It's about eating lots of foods, eating all different kinds of foods, and enjoying it, letting yourself be free, letting yourself eat things that maybe you've been scared of before, kind of pushing yourself to eat those foods almost, because getting through that fear and realizing that all the negative consequences that you imagine are going to happen when you eat, say, au bon pain almond croissant. Oh my God, they're so good. When you eat one of those, nothing is actually going to happen. There's this whole idea of food and sugar as toxic to us, I think, is not really taking into account how our bodies work. Biologically, we're meant to digest food, and there's a dose response to everything. If you were to eat only broccoli all day, every day, I can pretty much guarantee you're going to get pretty sick. Same thing if you eat sugar all day, every day, you're probably going to get pretty sick. It's all about balance and just eating all the foods and letting go of some of the fear-mongering that's been kind of shoved down our throats. If you eat X, you're going to get diabetes, and our bodies just don't work like that. So I really encourage you to kind of let go of some of those food fears and tackle those fears by eating those foods that you're scared of and just giving it a try and see what actually happens when you do it, which is probably you're going to feel fine. You might feel a little bit bloated or stomach discomfort, but that's something that you can work through. And if you expect that maybe your body might feel this way if you're eating something that you haven't eaten for a long time, that can happen. A lot of times I find that actually a lot of us, we tend to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables because those are sort of the quote-unquote healthy things to eat. And I find that actually when I encourage women to reduce intakes of fruits and vegetables, that they feel better, they feel less bloated and less gassy, and maybe have less stomach discomfort. So there's definitely something to giving that a try if you're having those kinds of, if you're having issues with bloating or discomfort. Okay, that's actually had a couple questions, so I think that's all I have right now on HA and recovery. So we'll move a little bit more into the getting pregnant, pregnancy type things, although Ashley's question is my thoughts on Vitex. So I actually have a number of blog posts on different supplements. Vitex is one that I specifically do not recommend for women who are trying to get their periods back. It's been shown in a number of animal studies to increase progesterone and prevent ovulation, which is the opposite of what we want. So you want high progesterone after ovulation, but not before ovulation. So that seems to be the mechanism by which Vitex works. So I just see that I've seen absolutely no logical reason for taking Vitex for HA recovery. I know that it's often suggested to people, and I think it's just generally, oh, this is good for hormones, so why don't you try taking it? And when I looked into it, I see no benefit for somebody with HA to taking Vitex. Other adaptogens or herbs, I say herbs because I was born in South Africa, and that's one of the things I have not managed to let go of. One that is definitely worth looking into, and I have another blog post on this, it's noperiod.info/ALC, is acetyl L-carnitine. So that is a supplement. There have actually been 3 studies performed in women with hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is great because a lot of times I'm just kind of gleaning information from studies done in populations of other women, like those with PCOS or unexplained infertility. This is actually studies done in women with HA, and what this research group has found is that in women who take acetyl L-carnitine, there's about a 70% recovery rate over 3 to 6 months. So, and more specifically in women with a low LH level, so below 3. So that is definitely something that I recommend looking into. G. Heartstone is asking about folic acid. That is something that I definitely recommend when you're trying to get pregnant, based on the fact that folic acid can help reduce spina bifida incidence. So that's something that should be in your prenatal vitamin, or if you're just taking a regular multivitamin, you can add folic acid on top of it. I haven't seen anything about that being helpful for HA recovery. So looking now at a couple of the questions more about trying to conceive. So that's Ashley says that Clomid worked to get pregnant for the first time, but now she's not even ovulating on it. Is it possible for it to work when her body is in a healthier place? And to that, I would say yes, absolutely. The fact that Clomid is not getting you to ovulate tells me that you should really take a step back and look at your lifestyle choices. Look at how much you're eating, look at the things that you're eating, how much are you exercising, are you doing high intensity exercise? If you are, I would cut that out like ASAP, especially if you want to get pregnant. But generally for HA recovery, I have found that high intensity exercise is just not helpful for recovery. So, it's a short-term change to make. Absolutely you can get back into it down the road once you've recovered, once you're pregnant. But for when you're working on recovery, walking is generally fine. Low intensity yoga is fine, but high intensity where you're getting your heart rate above 120 beats per minute or so tends to prevent recovery. So especially if you want to get pregnant, I would just put the kibosh on that for now. So let's see. Jay Martin asked about a short luteal phase and what can be done. Again, I recommend reading the chapter in No Period Now What about luteal phase. It explains a lot about what's going on, and particularly in women with hypothalamic amenorrhea, why it is that we tend to have short luteal phases. So when you're trying to get pregnant, I would strongly recommend talking to your doctor about getting a prescription for progesterone to help support your luteal phase when you're trying to conceive. And then let's see, Kim is asking about acupuncture. So acupuncture is something that I haven't really seen any evidence that it's specifically helpful with period recovery or getting pregnant, except for in some like specific cases of when you're doing IVF. But it's also not going to hurt. So if acupuncture is something that makes you feel good, it can be really great for stress relieving. I say go right ahead and do it. It's not something that it's not the case that you will not recover without doing acupuncture, but if it's something that you want to add and financially that's feasible for you, then absolutely go right ahead. What I would caution with that is a lot of acupuncturists will recommend that you also take their herbal mixtures. I tend to recommend staying away from those. Those are often not really tailored to HA recovery, but just more sort of the classic hormonal balancing kinds of things, more appropriate maybe for somebody that has PCOS. So I would tend to stay away from that. None of that works if you're not doing what you need to for HA recovery, which is eating more and cutting out your high intensity exercise. And And then, let's see, S. Nudo Spears has a couple of questions about getting pregnant after miscarriage, which is something that, miscarriage is a really, really hard thing to go to. And I'm really sorry if that's something that's something that you've experienced. In terms of specific nutrients to reduce the chance of miscarriage, I really haven't seen anything about that. One potential is coenzyme Q10, which is also called ubiquinol. It's not necessarily to reduce the chance of miscarriage, but it can help with egg quality. So there's some studies that suggest that might be helpful. In the case of low progesterone causing miscarriage, that can be sort of an underlying issue with HA. So in that case, I would definitely do, speak to your doctor about getting the prescription progesterone. Low progesterone tends to be a problem in an embryo that has a genetic problem to begin with. So, it's kind of a chicken and egg sort of thing. Like, is it the low progesterone that caused the miscarriage, or was the miscarriage going to happen anyway and the low progesterone is a sign of that? It's really hard to say. In terms of the question about when you can start trying to get pregnant again, I actually did a lot of research into this, both in my own situation after my miscarriage and also just when I was writing No Period Now What. There is a chapter in No Period Now What about miscarriage that might be helpful. It can be a little emotionally difficult to read, so you can read it or not depending on how you feel. But what I found is that there's no reason not to start trying to get pregnant once you are feeling emotionally ready to do so. There are a number of studies where they've looked at pregnancy rates. They found that there's no detriment to pregnancy rates if you start trying right away. There's no increased risk of miscarriage. So I really think that there's no reason not to start trying again right away as soon as you're ready. So Kate, I did actually answer your question earlier on, so this will be posted to my story after I'm done, and you can go back and look at what I said earlier. Aggie had a question about psychological stress versus the physical stress from working out, and why is that we place so much emphasis on stress for the gym and not so much on psychological stress. So it really is both. I think, we tend not to talk about the psychological stress as much as we talk about the physical stress, but it is something that we talk about in the book, and it's just, it doesn't come up in the Facebook group as much. So it's absolutely worth working on psychological stress. But using exercise to relieve that psychological stress is counterproductive. So you have to find other ways of doing that. So, whether you get into meditation, whether you listen to, music that can be relaxing, eliminate stressful people from your life, try and let go of things that you have no control over, let go of worrying about things that you have no control over. I think a lot of us tend to do that quite a bit. And so, yeah, it's definitely worthwhile to work on psychological stress as well as the physical stress. But we do, and you're right, we do tend not to talk about that as much. It is one of the parts of HA, though, because you can have women that get HA simply from psychological stress. So definitely worth working on. Okay, couple more questions, and then I have to get going because my mom is arriving for her weekly visit in just a few minutes. So Katie Koo is asking, can you recover your period if you've had HA for 12 years? And absolutely yes, the answer is 100% yes to that. My co-author Lisa, who wrote No Period Now What with me, had HA for 20 years, and she recovered her period in 5 months. I have a post on my blog about this where I looked at my data, and I actually found that there was no correlation between the length of time that somebody had HA and how long it took them to recover. So the median is 5 months, whether you've had your period, whether you've not had your period for 6 months or whether you've not had it for 20 years, which is actually really reassuring. I think it's really important to know that when you have HA, it's more like your hypothalamus is asleep rather than it being broken. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. It just needs more fuel and less stress in order to be able to turn back on again. And we do tend to have longer cycles when we first get our periods back, but those normalize over time. Yeah, you can get back to being in a very normal place. And then once you've recovered, you can get back into the exercise that you enjoy and love, doing it because you enjoy and love it, not to keep your body a certain size. Because when you've decided that your body has to be a certain size or shape, and your exercise and your eating are targeted towards that, that is really the driver for HA. And, I think learning to appreciate your body for the size it wants to be, and eat the foods that you enjoy, and exercise because you enjoy the movement, that's where you want to get to. So let's see. Kaylee is asking about menopause after an induced period. You absolutely, no matter what you're doing in terms of fertility treatments, it is so worthwhile to work on HA recovery, whether it's side by side, whether you work on HA recovery first. The injections are a little bit harder to control than a Clomid or Femara. You have a higher chance of having twins. You have a higher chance of overstimulating or having a cycle canceled. So I really, 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 really encourage you to work on recovery, at least in concert with doing injectables, if not beforehand. If you have more specific questions about that, please set up a call with me. I have so much information on all of this that I want to share with you guys. And, I really love this work that I'm doing now, because I get to help people get their periods back and get pregnant, and it's so incredibly fulfilling. And so I can help with all of these kinds of things. It's much easier to do on a one-on-one basis, where we can really talk about your individual history and what you're looking to get out of it. I think answering these one-off questions is great, and that, I hope that you get something out of it, but there's a lot of value to, working with me one-on-one. So if you want to work with me, you can go to noperiodnowwhat.com/consulting, or noperiod.info/appointments is if you're ready to book an appointment and set up some time. I think that's all for now, because my mom is arriving shortly. So I hope that this was helpful, and I'm going to post it'll be on my story for 24 hours, I think. And then I've also been recording on YouTube, or just on my webcam. So hopefully I can post this on YouTube for those who weren't able to catch it during this time. So thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate your joining, and continue to ask questions, and follow me on Instagram, and check out my blog. There's a ton of useful information on there. I also post some draft posts on Patreon, which is patreon.com/noperiodnowwhat. They're not polished like the ones that I post on my blog, but there's really interesting information in there as well, so worth checking out. Thank you, and please share and let other people know about getting their period back, and especially doctors. I think there are so many doctors that just don't know really anything about HA, and they give people a lot of misinformation. And so I have an HA information sheet that you can download from my Facebook support group. That's at noperiod.info/support if you want to join and you're not already in there. Just sharing the information about how underfueling and overexercise can lead us to a not great place. But it's absolutely possible to recover. I think that's really the key, is that this is a temporary thing, and once you fix those underlying problems, there's really no reason that you wouldn't get your period back. So I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon, and I will chat with you soon. Bye.